Welcome, everyone, and welcome to our first episode of Miracles Made Easy. I am your host, Brent Michael Phillips, and I am the run-of-the-mill MIT software engineer turned professional healer, and I'm here to make your life easier. And specifically, I really want to help spread the technology of consciousness, to show people the shortcuts, the easy way to advance this technology to improve our lives. If you don't know anything about me, I'll give you just a real quick recap. I was a hardcore software engineer and scientist, and I left MIT to form a startup company. Years of overwork shattered my health. I was put on permanent disability when I was 27 years old and spent 5 years exploring alternative medicine, but I didn't get better. My whole life changed in 2003. I had had a surgery that left my right arm frozen at the elbow. Several months later, I met this crazy healer lady named Terry. Terry showed me how to work with the subconscious and clear blocks. And at the end of our first session, my frozen elbow instantly healed. And that was the day that this MIT computer engineer became a healer. And I've spent my life ever since on a quest to discover the most powerful teachers, the most uh, amazing processes to really make miracles easy for people. And I'm very proud to be here today with one of the world's greatest energy workers, Dr. Karl Wolfe. Welcome, Karl.
Thank you, Brent. It's great to be here with you.
So, Karl, can you tell our audience a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Well, that's a good question,
It
isn't
is, isn't it?
it? I have a story too, and I also was an engineer. I was actually manager of engineering for Atlantic Richfield for 10 years, and then director of marketing and design for a high-tech firm in San Francisco before I went off into the healing arts as well. And my story is a little different because I went to a workshop in San Francisco where I did a 1 hour meditation, never having meditated before, and had what one would call a classical mystical experience where I got connected to a healing range that I had always known I'd had since I was born. And within a couple of months, I started my healing practice, left the company as an engineer, and started working with people energetically. I work with people telepathically at the quantum level, at the atomic level, something that I call quantum access. And I actually have the ability, which was awakened in that meditation, to connect with people anywhere in the world at the atomic level in the quantum field. It's really quite a fun experience if you've never had it before. We do have these higher states of consciousness available to us. And that's something I've been working with for years. And I developed a whole suite of diagnostic and therapeutic movement tools that we use to help people remove their masks and accelerate their process of spiritual awareness and self-realization and self-actualization. So, and Brent happens to be someone I've known for a number of years, and he has put together one of the best packages of consciousness studies there is. The work that I do is graduate level consciousness studies, and Brent is doing all the way from entry level up to higher levels of consciousness work as well. Again, he's put everything, written everything down and organized it in a way that is extremely comprehensive. If you really want to get started in this work, or you've done everything else and you're kind of stuck, Brent's a good place for you to start.
Awesome. And just so everyone knows, if you'd like to learn more about Karl Wolfe, we're absolutely going to talk a lot more here, but I want to give everyone the website right away, which is truesilence.com. So make sure you write that down. And I will provide my own personal endorsement. I know a lot of these hosts and shows, they've read 30 seconds about the guest beforehand, but I've actually known Karl for over 10 years and done all of his programs, and it absolutely changed my life. The short version is when I did his intensive life training, in 6 months, my income tripled and I found love and started a family. And that's no coincidence. So he is absolutely one of the most powerful and incredible people I've ever worked with. To give everyone a sense of how important Karl has been to me, when my son was born, there were only 2 people in the operating room other than doctors and nurses and his mother, and that was me and Karl. So that gives you a sense of how important he's been to me, and it's an honor and a pleasure to have you on, Karl.
Thanks, Brent.
So let's talk about this quantum field thing a little bit.
Yes.
Why would somebody want to get into the quantum field? What are the benefits?
Well, you may not be aware, well, maybe you are, but there are a lot of people who have been experimenting with psychedelics and all sorts of mind altering experiences, meditations, and drugs for years. And what I'm doing would be classed as anthogenic, probably something that it's not chemical. It allows you to experience the same heights of expanded consciousness that any of those prescription drugs or psychedelic drugs would do. The thing about why you would want to get into this is that our normal experience here on this physical plane is very different than most of us think. There are a lot of things that you can't see yet energetically. All around us is what appears to be empty space, and that empty space actually is filled with intelligence. It's the quantum field. It's the source from which everything else manifests, Brent. So what I discovered, years ago, I knew this when I was a child, didn't have a context for it, that I was reading people's minds and seeing energy fields around them. I didn't really know what it meant until I was in my 40s. And then, as I said, I woke up and then I discovered, and I'd always been highly successful, Brent. And I knew that what I was thinking was creating reality. And there was a point at which, as a successful engineer, I noticed I just kept moving up the ladder. I kept envisioning myself doing that. I kept envisioning more success, more money, more responsibility coming in. And it just kept happening. And then there was a point at which I noticed there were a few things I was getting that I didn't know why I was getting them. Why am I getting this so-called negative event and that so-called negative event in my life? And not until I woke up did I realize that there was an unconscious process running in the background. And that unconscious process I was servicing all the time by avoiding what it was that I didn't want in the future. And whatever you avoid, you're focusing on it, right? And so
That's
you're
right.
actually creating it. So I finally one day realized, oh my God, I'm focusing on what I don't want in certain areas, not many, because I would get a lot of really neat things in my life. But then I realized, oh, what I'm focusing on to avoid is actually creating it. It's actually because that's where my focus of attention is. And so I started noticing, well, if I don't want that, what do I want, right? And then I'd find the things I didn't want, and I'd start focusing on redirecting that energy into the vision of what it was that I was choosing for a future experience. And that was another cool piece too, that I discovered that if you can't feel yourself in the experience of what you're envisioning right now in the present moment, it won't happen in the future. So as an example, people want to make more money. It's just part of what we do, and you need to do that in your life. It's important. And if you can't feel what it feels like to have $100,000 or to make $100,000 or to make a million or to make 10 million, it won't happen for you because you'll be uncomfortable in that energetic. So I discovered that I was always comfortable. I always felt wealthy. I grew up on a farm in the country. I didn't have a sense of how much money we had. I just always felt wealthy, Brent. And if you feel wealthy, what do you think is going to happen, Brent?
You're going to attract more money.
You're
It's
going
that
to attract
simple, huh?
more, where you're going to attract more of whatever that success looks like for you in your life, whether it's money or things or pleasure or just getting to do the things you want to do that you have fun doing. If you're a scientist, you get to do more of them. For me, the first thing that happened is I noticed one day they handed me a $300 million project. This is back in the 70s, right? I went, that's interesting. Why are they giving me this kind of budget? And it didn't mean anything to me. I didn't realize how significant that was. If you look back at it now, it's $1 billion probably. But then, I achieved that. I got that project running. I got it up in 3 years. It was on time, on budget. Then they gave me another 300 million, another 300 million. And then they wanted to move me on to build a new research center in Chicago. And I'm like, this is kind of interesting. Why is this? But it was the vision that I had when I was 14 years old was that I would be an engineer in a large company and I'd be running it. Of course, by the time I was 28, I was running a company with 2,000 employees, Brent.
It's pretty
And
impressive.
well, but again, I when I walked in the door as an engineering trainee, I felt like I owned the company. I dressed like I owned the company. And I felt like I was the president of the company. And within a month, they doubled my salary. I started looking for problems. I started coming up with solutions. A lot of it was intuitive, Brent. And that was one of the things that happened for me as an engineer. I I didn't have things written down the way the other engineers did, Brent. It was really a little scary for me because I was creating intuitively, and I didn't document things the way everybody else did. They didn't give the other people $300 million budgets. They gave them to me. And I started comparing myself to other people and feeling inferior because I wasn't doing it the way they were doing it. I was doing it like magic.
Hmm.
And yet, I look back at it now and it's kind of funny because, when you're there and you're young and you're naive and you don't realize the power you have with your mind, and you don't realize how easy it is, Brent. And you understand what I'm saying. We hear this all the time with our people. You give them some tools. I hear it with your people all the time. You give them a whole series of entry-level tools. They start applying them, and all of a sudden, everything in their life starts getting easy. And there's no rational explanation, right? How many times have you heard that? How
Oh,
did it
I don't
happen?
know,
Well, you
four or 500,
well
something
you
like that.
remember you remember the conversation we had about the air conditioning in your building,
That's right. Yeah, this
and
is a great story I'll share with everybody.
yeah, it's a great
This
story.
was, what, 2010-ish, something like
Yeah.
that?
Oh, at least, yeah.
So about 8, 9, 10 years ago. And I was living in my building and the heat wasn't working. And the unit on the roof needed to be repaired. But because the homeowners association were being jerks and they wouldn't give me the authorization to go and fix it. So I had no heat during probably the coldest winter of the last 30 years in Los Angeles. And I showed up at Carl and complained about it a bunch of times
A few
until
times.
one day, yeah,
Well,
several
and every
times.
time you complained, I said the same thing.
Yep.
I
He
said,
said,
Brent,
I can fix that.
I can fix that.
Right.
And you kept
And
complaining, and I kept
yep.
saying, Brent,
And I want
give me a
everyone to
call.
notice
I
that
can fix that.
I was so attached to my story, I didn't actually want it to be fixed for a while. I just wanted to complain.
Exactly.
And then one day, Carl said it to me again. He goes, Brent, I can fix that. And I actually heard it. And I asked him, I'm like, okay, Carl, let's fix this. And I think you said you knew somebody that worked for the city and they'd make sure that
I
I
said
got
I
all the
knew somebody, it
authorizations.
would all get taken care of, and just call me. And then what happened? I don't even think you called me.
No, I didn't even need to
You
because
didn't
the
even need
very next day I had another repairman out
to. Yeah,
and he said that he literally touched the wires and everything started working.
yeah,
And he didn't do anything to it.
yeah.
And here we are almost 10 years
It's
later,
still running.
haven't had any problems with it.
Now it sounds really phony and funny, but it
It does. This
sometimes
really
things
happened.
work that way. Yeah, yeah,
This really happened.
yeah, yeah. And it's a great story because it does highlight how we don't realize the power of our mind, and how when you're putting information out into the quantum field, it's evoking response from a number of people out there, either in a positive or a negative way. You're writing a story about your life, and you're getting other people to show up and participate in it with you, and they will. They'll make sure your air conditioning doesn't work, or they'll make sure it works, right? But we don't realize
Absolutely.
we're doing that. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So
Yeah, I found that most people are unconsciously creating every aspect of their life.
yeah, well, we
And then
are.
they're surprised when they start to learn how to control it that things
Yeah.
change. Of course they change.
Yeah. Well, and you've seen too. I mean, initially you get in there and it's like beginner's luck. Like when the first time I went bowling, I did really well, and then I did horribly for the rest of my life because I didn't have any expectation. You see
Sure.
people come in without an expectation, and they learn some of the tools that you have, and they create a result, and it happens, and then everything comes to a screeching halt again, right? You've seen that happen too.
Absolutely. That's
Yeah.
why I like to
What's
say
that one
that
about?
we all live in prisons constructed out of what we think we know.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you kind of have to get people through cycle after cycle of expansion. They're actually learning how to grow the size of their container, right? To increase the psychological terrain that you live in. It's kind of fascinating. If you have a really small container and you have a problem, it's a big problem. But if you have a
That's
really
right.
big container and you have a problem, it's not going to affect you as much.
You know,
So
that's a wonderful thought you have. I want to elaborate on that a little bit, but first we're going to take a quick station break. So we are here on Miracles Made Easy with our guest, Dr. Karl Wolfe from TrueSilence.com, and we'll be back in just a few minutes. Welcome back, everyone. I am Brent Michael Phillips from MIT here with Miracles Made Easy with our guest today, Dr. Karl Wolfe. His website is TrueSilence.com. And so, Karl, I wanted to pick up on something that you mentioned before the break, which is, I think so valuable to the listeners. And it's this, that we can't get rid of the negative aspects of our life, but we don't realize that we have a bucket for the positive, whether it's money or health or love or purpose. And we get stuck in these stories, and we're trying to pour more and more money, all these things we want, into a bucket that's not big enough to receive it.
yeah, yeah.
It's pretty crazy, huh?
And it's kind of interesting, Brent, because when you have negative thoughts that are unconscious that are running, it's like putting a brick in the bucket, right? And it pushes out some of the water. So the bucket gets even unable to contain as much energy. It's an energy thing, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think a lot of people take the wrong approach. They think, well, let's get rid of all the bricks.
Yeah, that's the key, boy. You can hear yourself, let's get rid of this, let's get rid of that, let's get rid of the other thing. And what do you think happens, Brent, when they start focusing on the negative, which is what a lot of our entry level work does? It
Sure.
focuses on the positive and avoids the negative.
By resisting the negative, we
Yeah,
actually
and
incur more of it.
yeah, you actually end up being run by the shadow material and the negative and all your unconscious material.
Yeah, and it's so fascinating. Just a few days ago, I was at a musical performance by Lindsay Sterling, a dancing violinist. And she was on stage with, she said, her childhood idol, Amy Lee from Evanescence. And she said, "You know how I got here? Well, first, I spent a lot of years trying to get rid of the negative aspects of myself, the anger, the pain, the frustration. And I went to doctors, I went to therapy, I took psychiatric drugs, and none of it worked." She says, "It was really simple. I just had to expand and focus on the things I wanted and leave the negative alone. You can't get rid of it, it will be there, but you can expand what you do want." And so there may be bricks in your bucket in our metaphor, but we all have the power to simply make the bucket bigger.
Yeah.
And
Well,
if you just make the bucket big enough, those bricks become
well,
irrelevant, don't they?
yeah, and all the negative things that you focus on that tie up your energy, you basically have to eat them, Brent, and digest them and transmute them into something of use to you. But if you're afraid of it, it isn't gonna help you. You have to fall in love with what it is that you're avoiding in your life, penetrate it, and be informed by it, and it will inform you because it's simply energy, isn't it?
And it's funny because a lot of our teachers and channels have told us that we're here to have all experiences,
Yeah.
that the good and the bad is simply in our minds.
Well, and you see that we get addicted to suffering too, and we think that all there is suffering. And the thing about eating all of these negative things or ingesting them or integrating them is that, interestingly enough, rather than being at the effect of the suffering, you become all suffering, and it doesn't take you out anymore. It
Because you
becomes
have a
part.
really big bucket.
Yeah, you have a
You can
really
carry a
big
lot of
bucket.
bricks in that bucket, huh?
Yeah, and you're informed by these experiences in a way that you can't imagine, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So what's one of the most powerful processes that you're still using with people today?
I think one of the most powerful processes that I have, of course, it's the quantum accesses, which is using this natural gift that I was born with, to work with people telepathically. However, it's the movement diagnostics that really change people's lives. For me, I was in a movement class because I realized I was becoming rigid. And about 3 months into the class, I realized I looked in the mirror, I was not doing the same thing the teacher was doing. I was in a parallel universe. And that's the first inkling I had that I was lying to myself about everything in my life. And as they say, I was living in a parallel universe. You can't really, if you're lying to yourself about a lot of things, even though you might be highly functional in some areas, those things that you're lying to yourself about are going to get you eventually. They're going to catch up to you. But I noticed right away that the movement was the best lie detector I'd ever seen. And as an engineer, I started creating a technology, right? I
Mm-hmm.
thought, You know, engineers oftentimes have high intellect and they can con themselves better than anybody else, right? And I was conning myself without realizing. So over the years, out of more than 30 years now, I developed a whole set of diagnostic tools. We were doing rollerblading diagnostics for a while. We did them for several years, which are extremely transformational. You get about 10 years of therapy in a couple of hours. And then we started working with a tightrope. We call it the slack line, having people walk on the slack line. And in a 2-day workshop, people transmute so much energy on an unconscious level. It's absolutely amazing to watch. You can go to the website and look at some of the before and after videos. It's mind-blowing to see how the rational mind is running the person. They collapse the ego and the rational mind down. They get connected to the silence within, and everything in their life stabilizes. And you know why that is, Brent? Because how you do anything is how you do everything. So you can use anything as a diagnostic. We have a lot of really simple techniques that you use. We're just having somebody move their hands
Sure.
and reading the energy fields, the subliminal messages that we're sending out, the subliminal mythologies that through which we're projecting ourselves into this physical reality. And a lot of what we're doing is working at the genetic level as well. A lot of behaviors are attracted by the genetics to the person. Their lineage has a certain set of behaviors that want to get expressed through consciousness, through genetics in the world. And we actually start reprogramming at a genetic level with these diagnostic tools. You want to say more about it, Brent?
Sure. Anyone that's interested, I would encourage you. I have done, I don't know, at least 6, maybe 8 of these slackline diagnostics. I find them incredibly powerful and transformative. You can go to Karl's website at truesilence.com.
Yep, we have one coming up in September. Actually, it's going to be the last one.
Silence.com, and look for the slackline.
Yeah. We have one
great.
coming up in September. It's the last one this year.
And it's really an incredible thing. It defies logic and rational explanation.
It does.
It's,
if you're
I know.
an engineer or a scientist, you'll really appreciate it.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. One thing I can say about Karl's work is when I first met Karl, I thought that it wasn't really valuable because I didn't understand what he was doing.
Yeah.
Because I had worked with so many healers and shamans and intuitives and all this stuff. And after several years of that, I could quickly kind of pigeonhole people and what they were doing and figure out how it worked. When I did the movement with Karl, I had no idea what was going on. I just thought he was nuts. And true story, I met Karl the day after I went bankrupt. And within a week, I was making more money than I ever had in my life. And I know that's certainly far from the only success story. Karl, do you have a couple of success stories from the slackline you can share?
We have so many. Yeah, we have so many where people turn everything in their life around, and you
just pick one that comes to mind and share with everybody.
It's really hard to pick one because there's so many. Let's see which one. Well, there was a woman who came down and did a slackline, and she was working with a real estate agency, selling real estate. And she did the slackline, and I didn't hear from her for 2 months probably. And I said, well, what happened to you? And she said, well, the most interesting thing happened. She said, I decided to start my own business, the very next day. And I went out and everything in my life took off. And she said, I'd been so busy selling properties that I couldn't get back to do another class. Right? And it's interesting because we had another fellow who was a musician who was working in Las Vegas, and his career was kind of stalled, did the slackline, and he's been on touring for like 5 years now. He's worked with all the major groups. He's been on The Voice, and he's working with Bruno Mars right now on a new album. But boom, just like that, everything takes off, but you can't explain it to anyone. It's fascinating.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's really special about Karl is you were made into a character on The Simpsons, weren't you?
Yes. Karl with the camera, because
yes.
we use the camera. So
and
you know what I told Bart?
What?
Just stop.
Just stop.
Yeah, just stop.
That's right.
And that's what I told you too.
And I know you've had people come through that have gone on to win Olympic gold medals.
Yes, we've had several Olympic swimmers and skaters, and
you've had lots of people in the entertainment industry that go on to win Emmys or Oscars or whatever.
We have some of the most successful, client lists are some of the most successful people in the business. And I was just out in LA for a couple of weeks. You're not aware of this, I don't think, because I was invited out to work with one of the top directors that I'd worked with 25 years ago, because he's ready to completely change his life now. And you're going to see some amazing film projects come out in the near future. I'm not going to mention his name, but it's been fun. And as an example, I worked with Quincy Jones um, for about a year and a half, and Quincy hadn't made a record in years. He hadn't had a record in 10 years, actually. And I worked with him on that project, which became the album Back on the Block. It won 7 Grammys, first album he'd done 10 years. And then he came forward and produced The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. That all came out of work that I did with him over about a year and a half. Again, you can't explain that to anyone, right? I have Pamela Phillips Olin, who has the most successful musical on stage in the world right now. It's been on stage going on 8 years, sold out every single night. And she called me in 2014, Brent, and said, well, you were right. I was so pissed off at you. I stormed out of your office. Well, once I did everything you said, within a week, it all started happening. And it took 10 years to get her to stop doing what she was doing that was holding back that musical, and it took off.
Pretty amazing. The short version is this stuff works, huh?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
And there's 30 some years of incredible success stories, including my own experience as evidence.
There's so many I can't even remember them, and I don't even remember the people I've worked with. I worked with so many because, you don't keep score. You just really appreciate the fact that there's a certain generosity in this quantum field, right?
Sure.
And it's our responsibility to share that generosity with folks, isn't it?
Yeah. And, I know a lot of people come through your programs and end up increasing their income by 10 times or more.
Yes.
If you're a total head case like me, you may only double or triple your income. That was my experience, but that's still not bad.
If you can add a 0 or 2, that's great. And it's funny because people will always say to me, oh, I forgot to tell you, within a month or two, I added a 0 or 2 to the income.
Sure.
Or, I have one guy who lives in Monaco now, never had a relationship. He's married, has a daughter, moved to Monaco, has an amazing life, and they're great stories. They're fun stories.
It's beautiful. Let me ask you this. What do you think the world would be like if everybody went through this process? If everybody learned to get into the quantum field to do the movement? I don't know,
Brent. It would be very different. And eventually everyone will go through this process because that's our destiny, isn't it?
I think so.
But, we all come in here to have fresh experience. And some of us want to play with suffering for a while longer. And you have to, really be gracious and supportive of someone who needs to suffer. Because you can't, if you found this out, you can't
take
suffering away from them until they're ready to give it up.
And I would say to everybody, if you need to hold on to your story a little while longer, if you need to complain or be a victim or be in pain, that's okay. We understand. Yeah. It was like me with the heater. I needed to complain about it.
That was the best, it's like you get to see. If you complain, whine and complain, you're a crap magnet. You'll get as much crap as you need. And you were in a phase of your life where some of this unconscious material was turning into crap, right?
That's right. And I had to be present to it for a certain time. And then one day I heard what you were saying, and literally the heating fixed itself the next day.
Yeah. Well, and
the guy didn't even charge me for the visit.
Oh, that was so cool.
Because he literally opened the thing, went to touch the wires, and everything turned on and started working. Yeah. And he felt bad. He's like, I can't charge you for this. There's nothing wrong here. And it's still working to this day. Amazing, huh?
I hear you.
Well, it's been wonderful to chat with you, Karl. And again, I would strongly encourage everyone to check out Dr. Karl Wolfe's website at truesilence.com. And those of you that come through my trainings, you'll see a lot of Karl because he's been an enormous influence on my work. And he helps me co-teach some of my advanced sessions like the Level 4 and the Awakening Intensive.
Yeah.
Karl, do you have a final message for everybody before we sign off?
My final message is, go over and check out Brent's website too. What's your website again?
AwakeningDynamics.com.
Yes, AwakeningDynamics.com for some of the best beginning work and intermediate and advanced work that's available in consciousness studies. And if you want to join us, you can find us on the website. We'd love to see you. And thank you, Brent.
Well, Karl, it's been a pleasure and an honor to have you on our show.